From the WNIN Tri-State Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. Good friends are like quilts. They age with you, yet never lose their warmth. Blessed are the quilters, for they shall be peacemakers. I just had an out-of-bobbin experience. And quilters are not just greedy, they are just materialistic. Is that right, ladies? Okay. Who says quilting isn't fun? This program looks at the history, the skill, and the whimsy of quilting. My 2 guests are the past president of the Raintree Quilters Guild, Darlene Robinette, and with her is the publicity chair, Karen Hampton. Ladies, welcome to 2 Main Street, and you have brought us a beautiful quilt to show us. And let's start with this, and the quilt that folks are seeing behind you is what, Karen?
That is our current year raffle quilt. We do a quilt every year or every 2 years as need be and raffle it. This quilt, a lot of the members hand appliqued and then they hand quilted it. So it is all done by hand. It's an exceptional piece. I hope whoever wins it really appreciates the work that's gone into it.
It is colorful and attractive. You could hang that one on the wall, definitely. It's a piece of art.
You could.
Now let's learn more about the Raintree Quilters Guild. Darlene, how long has the guild been around?
In 1986, there were about 7 ladies that gathered at Bear's fabric store here on Main Street. And they said there should be a group that could be together and promote the art of quilting and exchange ideas. And from there, they advertised, and they had 25 ladies at the very first meeting, and that's how we began.
Mm-hmm. Now, Karen, how many members do we have right now?
We have about 120 members, so it's a large group from the whole tri-state area.
And how often do you guys get together?
We meet every month. It's the first Wednesday of the month at Swerka.
And what are these meetings like?
We usually have someone that does a program. We have someone speak on quilts or a traveling teacher that comes in and speaks.
So when did you ladies start quilting? Let's start with you, Darlene.
In the mid-'90s, I was listening to Simply Quilts here at PBS.
Yay.
And always enjoyed the process. I took a quilt lesson, and then I took a visitor to Evansville, and we went to the first Raintree meeting together. And from there, I was hooked. I joined, and so I've been a member since 1996.
And what about you, Karen?
Well, I've been a member since 2000. But I really got into it after going to the Paducah Quilt Show.
And, of course, Paducah is home to the National Quilting Museum.
Correct.
Fabulous place. That's on my bucket list to go visit that place. And so did you guys, were you quilting as a young ladies? Were you in teenagers? Did you start quilting?
I did some home sewing in early married life, and then some home deck sewing, but never quilting until I started in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Any home ec class experience?
Yes, same here. I did a lot of sewing, but garments growing up because Grandma was the one that quilted.
Yes.
So I did not get into quilting until I saw some of the art quilts that were up at Paducah's.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, these quilts become family heirlooms, don't they? Passed on generation through generation. Has that been the case in your home?
It has been, yes. Grandma, like I said, made quilts, always had one every time any of her grandkids got married. And after a while, she couldn't keep up with embroidering them and making them, so Grandpa says, I think I can do that. So Grandpa embroidered them, and Grandma quilted them, and they could keep up with all the grandkids.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. What about you, Darlene? Is that a family tradition?
My great-grandmother quilted. So we've always had quilts on the bed and have lived with them in our homes. And But she was a traditional quilter at that point in time, and so most of my keepsakes have been worn out.
Now, do you preserve quilts? Do people bring in quilts into you guys and you can repair them?
Individuals will do that, David, more so than our guild. We kind of help to learn from each other and teach each other, and but sometimes a quilt has been well worn, so you just have to kind of make a judgment whether it's worthwhile to try to save it.
And just retire it.
That's right.
Okay, it's had its many years of good use. Okay.
We do stress for all those legacy quilts to make sure you document them while the quilter is still alive. Put a label on the back with the quilter's name, the date they made them, any stories that go with it, document them so that when they are passed down, they know what they have.
So there's a story behind each one of these quilts?
There are.
Like who made them, what was going on at the time, and who's it made for?
Right.
Okay, all right. Now, would you consider quilting maybe a craft or an art form, or both?
Both.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really more of a traditional quilter, and Karen is what I would consider an art quilter. She's got beautiful art pieces. She's had entries into the Paducah Quilt Show herself. And in fact, our quilt behind us was in the Paducah Quilt Show this year.
Mm-hmm. Now, the history of quilting is quite a history, going back centuries. And have you done any research into that, Karen?
Some, especially in the state of Indiana with Marie Webster.
Now, she's the one that's featured in the Indiana Quilting Museum. Is that correct?
She is at the Quilters Hall of Fame in Marion, Indiana. In fact, the house that the museum is in was her residence. She was one of the early quilters that published patterns in like the Better Homes and Gardens, the Ladies' Journal, and then took out ads in newspapers for people to order the patterns. And they would send them their $4.50 and get a whole quilt.
And now we've talked about the museum in Paducah, and that's showcases quilts from around the world. Is that right?
Yeah, international.
Mm-hmm. So when you walk into that museum, what's it like?
Oh, breathtaking. It's the best of the best, David. And many of the Paducah Quilt Show winners, Best of Show, have now migrated to the Quilt Museum. And they've been storing quilts since 1980. I believe the museum opened in like 1990, but they have all kinds of exhibits. I've read where they've curated over 250 exhibits, and they do about 4 exhibits at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always changing and always something to see. And they had they give classes with these national teachers, and I read where they have served over 90,000 students in their years. So it's quite the place to go visit.
So the artisans will come from all over the country to
Yes.
hone their skills.
Yes.
Yes.
So what are some of your favorite items there at the Paducah Museum that just caught your eye,
Ooh.
Karen?
Well, one of my favorite artists is Carol Fallert, and it's Carol Breyer Fallert Gentry. Is her name now, because she did art quilts. She did one of the first ones that was called a Corona. She hand dyed all of her fabrics, bright, colorful, flowing lines, but it was more of an art quilt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was machine quilted, which at the time in the 80s was not done. So she did some groundbreaking changes there.
Mm-hmm. So she's kind of a rock star in the
Yes, she
quilting
is.
world.
Yes.
Okay. Now, of course, your organization, the Raintree Quilters Guild, you do have a philanthropic mission as well.
Oh, yes, we do. We've kind of made a list, but Karen, can you name some of them?
every year we have a quilt show, and every year we have a featured charity. So a cause that's near and dear to a quilter's heart gets presented, and we vote on which charity to do. I worked one year with the Komen Foundation. So we did a block contest that was open to the public. Then we used all those blocks and made numerous quilts, numerous tote bags, auctioned a lot of those off, raised over $5,000 for them.
Really? That's great. That's great. And I was talking to you earlier, Darlene, and you talked about some kind of revolutionary process that changed the quilting world.
Well,
what is that all about?
Our grandmothers, in their day, they would cut out their patterns on the cardboard boxes, like a cereal box, and trace around it and make their patterns. And then in the 80s, we came up with the rotary cutter and the rotary mat. And it changed our quilting world because we've gotten rulers where we can just use the rotary cutter and cut our fabrics in the various shapes. And then, of course, there's all kinds of little templates out to make special designs that we use in our quilts. So that has regenerated the quilting movement, and it's brought in a lot of the younger quilters. Plus, machine quilting is so prevalent now in our industry that you can have a quilt done in 3 or 4 months instead of a year, 2 years. So that has really changed the quilting world.
Are there still old school quilters that do it by hand?
Oh, there are. even some of the younger members love doing it by hand.
Mm-hmm. I guess it makes it even more special, doesn't it?
It does.
That? Okay. Karen Hampton is here, and Darlene Robinette as well. Evansville-based Raintree Quilters Guild. The history of quilting goes back centuries, and ivory carving shows an Egyptian king wearing what appears to be a quilted cloak. In the Bible, there's the story of Joseph's coat of many colors, but it's not clear if the coat was quilted or not. The quilting tradition travels to America. Quilting bees become social events, and I understand there are still quilting bees. And during the Civil War, women in both the North and South made quilts as fundraisers and for bedding for the troops. Abolitionists put anti-slavery poems and sayings in their quilts. A popular story is that the quilts would be used to guide slaves seeking freedom along the Underground Railroad. And there are some rock stars in the quilting world. We talked about one of them, and also G. Bend. Tell me about
G. Bend.
Tell me about G. Bend, Karen.
I don't remember where they are from.
It's the South.
In the South. But they were actually separated from in a landlocked area, and they didn't associate with anyone outside of their area. So they came up with their own look of quilting. It was a scrap pieced look, but their looks are so different from all the rest of the U.S. and their patterns, their colors. They're so striking. They're almost an art quilt.
Mm-hmm.
I would
And they
say.
had to use their own worn-out clothing to make these because they didn't have ready-made fabrics.
So is this like was it a movement or is that a person?
It's a group.
Oh, it's a group called that, called G. Bend. Okay, check it out, folks. Now, also the Amish quilting tradition.
They're known for their colors and their simple designs. Most of them have a dark background, a black background with a brighter color to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not an elaborate quilt, but they've done it in the traditional ways of hand quilting.
Okay. Now, on display behind you, Karen, is one of your quilts, an art quilt. Tell us about this quilt.
This is a digital quilt where you start with multiple different photos, and merge them together on the computer, getting an image that you're pleased with. Then it's printed onto fabric and then quilted.
Mm-hmm.
But it's meant to hang on the wall as an art piece.
So how long did this piece take you?
I don't keep track. You know, when it's a labor of love, you
Sure.
just have to do it.
Does it have a title?
It does. It's called Into the Mist.
Okay.
And there are so many barns out there. I grew up on a farm, but they're all disappearing. So I wanted to do a homage to the old-fashioned barns.
That's beautiful. It really is. Now, what are crazy quilts?
Crazy quilts are pieces that are sewn together in an irregular fashion, and then they're embellished by beads and ribbons and laces. And some of them from our grandmothers are really historic, and usually they use a heavier batting, so they're heavy on their beds, which they needed in those
Sure.
times.
Mm-hmm.
But we do some crazy quilting, but we're more the traditional and the art quilts in our group.
Mm-hmm. And this quilt here is really beautiful. Tell me about this one.
This is another art quilt.
Mm-hmm. And you said the pattern dates back?
It is a William Morris old wallpaper pattern from
Yeah.
the 1800s.
Wow, this is gorgeous. That is gorgeous. It's
But
so colorful.
It's another way of doing quilts where I started with a white piece of fabric, actually painted all the color on, and then turned all of the edges under as an applique by hand, and then machine quilted it.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you guys have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of quilts in your years with the Quilters Guild. What are some of the more unusual? I mean, I guess every year there's a new striking quilt that captures your fancy. What are some of your favorite ones?
Being the traditional quilter, I fell in love with the Dresden plate pattern. It's just so many ways to do it. And I made 13 different quilts out of the Dresden plate before I was done. So my friends call me the Dresden plate queen.
So what is a Dresden plate?
We had a
Thank goodness.
red and white challenge a number of years ago, and it's really just petals around a circle in the middle. So this is called 21 plate salute to Dresden, because there's 21 different variations of how to do that. But it's fun.
Oh,
Very creative.
So every time you go to one of these meetings, you get some new ideas?
You do.
Mm-hmm.
You do. There's all different ways of doing quilts. Some of the years past, they would do signature quilts where everyone would do a block, leave a space, and everyone would sign it with their signature. So you can take quilt blocks to family reunions, which we've done before, and have everyone sign it. And it's just a document showing everyone that was there, as a keepsake.
Mm-hmm.
But some of my favorites are some of the modern quilts. And there are other guilds that are modern quilt guilds. So the modern movement is very little, a lot of negative space, a lot of color, and very little quilting except for maybe matchstick quilting, just straight lines.
So is there such a thing as a modern art quilt?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So you can have abstract
Yes.
quilts?
Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
Interesting. Interesting.
David, one of my most inspirational things is our show and tell at our meetings, because when we've completed a quilt, at the end of our meetings, we have show and tell. And so, when you have 70, 80 women at a meeting that, maybe 10 of them bring something that meeting and show you, we're just such a diverse group, but it's always so inspirational to see what they've done and the colors.
Mm-hmm.
And so willing to share their techniques, How did you do that? Well, let me tell you. You know?
So, what are some frequently asked questions from folks wanting to get into this quilting hobby?
Well, they think it's an innocent hobby, but it's really my happy room is my sewing space. I can just go in there and find my soul again. It's just a fun place to be creative and play.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Same for me. My studio at home, that's my happy place. Yes.
You retreat there and you're in your own
Yes.
little world.
Yes.
And you can create.
Yes. You can just create without inhibitions. Just whatever's in your head, just you can make.
Are there many men out there in these quilting circles?
We do have some, and usually there's a gentleman or two that is in our membership, and they have a different way of looking at things. We have one recent quilter, and he was an engineer, but he became fascinated with a program on the computer of helping design things that you can change colors and turn things around. And his wife was a quilter. So they came as a husband and wife group to our meetings. But he liked to do things. He loved the Beatles, and he did a beetle quilt and airplane quilt. And so they've just got a different way of looking at it than we ladies do.
How has the computer changed the quilting landscape?
It has changed a lot because there are long arms now that you can program to quilt an entire quilt. You design the quilting pattern on the computer, push the button. Yes.
And so your imagination just runs wild on this.
And then YouTube. I was listening to a program the other day about quilting, and they were talking about textile talks on YouTube and classes. I take a class that is based in California, and I can do that over the computer. It's just opened up such a world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell me about the different textiles that are used in quilting.
Well, actually, there are a lot of them that hand dye their own fabrics and do their own surface techniques, or even just paint their entire quilts.
Basically, your traditional quilts are done out of cotton. 100% cottons, and we have 5 quilt shops in our local area that have such a nice variety of things to choose from. And you can embellish with silks and ribbons and laces. There's wool quilts, but your cotton is your most traditional.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of show and tell, and let me show you something here. My wife, she's got all kinds of quilts, and this was a quilt that was made for her high school graduation. And how do you define this quilt? By just looking at it,
I see a Lemoyne star.
Okay.
Right here.
Uh-huh.
And this is like from eastern Kentucky, where it was made, like in Letcher County. I don't know if that's...
And David, you can date a quilt just because of the fabrics that are used in it. Mm-hmm. And the batting is another way of telling.
But I mean, it's just, it's just interesting.
It's all hand quilted.
Yeah. And this is this is a really old one.
That's really. That's
it's
the grandmother's flower garden, or the wedding.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
So this is definitely an old quilt.
This is a wedding ring.
Okay, that's what that's described?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So these are classic heirloom quilts.
They are. Definitely. And there are quilt appraisers out there that can date them for you and give you an idea of what they're worth.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the quilting is a business.
Can be.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So you don't just quilt for fun. You can quilt for some income.
Yes. In fact, I'm a candidate right now for a NACQJ, which is the National Association of Certified Quilt Judges.
Okay.
So working through that to be a quilt judge.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? You just travel around the country or what?
Travel to different quilt shows and judge the shows.
Well, that's exciting, isn't it?
Yes.
And you get to see all these beautiful quilts as you do that.
Yes.
Wonderful. And we do have another quilt up on the rack behind us. Tell us about this quilt, ladies.
We have a block that is presented at our guild meetings, and we're asked to make a block personally at home and bring it to the next meeting. And so then we have a variety of blocks that come in all sorts of colorways. So then the trick is to put them together somehow, and that's what has happened here. The blocks are made by members, and then a committee puts them together in a charity quilt, and then they go into the world. Sometimes someone in our community needs a little fundraiser, and we would present a quilt to them to raise some funds for their organization. We give to the police department for anybody that might be like having a small child that they remove from a home or such, that they can be comforted with them. Another one of our favorite charities is our angel quilts, and Karen has a sample here. And this is made by a member, and it's presented to a short-lived baby at a hospital. Mm-hmm. So often when a mother loses a child, she has nothing to take home. And so this is kind of something that she can wrap her child in and say their goodbyes, and then she has it as a keepsake. So we do a lot of these angel quilts.
We do over 100 of these a year. The charity quilts, they go out all over the place. Everything from Albion Bacon Fellows to Hillcrest Home for Children. So they have something when they're 18 and leave the home.
Well, I think making these angel quilts, that has to be an emotional experience to do that.
We get wonderful notes back from people.
Oh, I bet. So we have quilts for different occasions. We have friendship quilts, comfort quilts, baby quilts as well. I was doing some research, and there's the Jane Sickle quilt, which is 169 5-inch blocks, each in different patterns, 5,602 pieces with a scallop border. Wow. And there is also the Project AIDS quilt. I remember that back in the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic. Mm-hmm. This quilt was put out in Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. Just massive quilt. I think it was 54 tons, and it went on a national tour, and that gave a lot of attention to quilting, definitely. Remember that, ladies?
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's something called the narrative quilting. What is that? Just obviously tells a story?
Yes. Sometimes you have a story to tell. Like a friend is doing wonky houses, but it's houses on her street, and she's made them into kind of an art that's colorful. And it's just reminiscent of a place that she lived through her life. But it's really a neat little quilt.
I bet. And what is tessellation?
Tessellations? The same from Escher, where one shape starts and it gradually changes into another shape.
And that's another form of quilting?
It is.
That's right.
Very creative. You say there's a Quilters Hall of Fame?
Yes. That's in Marion, Indiana,
mm-hmm.
that we kind of spoke about before. And Ellie Sinquit.
She's known for her applique. I
Yes.
can't say her last name either. she's being inducted into the Hall of Fame this year.
Oh, okay.
And she's wrote over 24 books, and she's traveled the globe teaching her stories.
Uh-huh.
But she makes beautiful quilts.
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore album quilts is her specialty.
And so she's a native Hoosier?
No, she's not.
Oh, she's not.
The Quilters Hall of Fame honors people who have made an impact on the quilting world. And,
okay.
And she certainly has.
Okay. All right. So some basic quilting 101. You have your traditional quilt, patchwork quilt.
Yes.
Is that your kind of you're starting out with doing that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's your
But
starter.
your simple, log cabin, is a very easy one to start with.
Okay. You have your art quilting, which we've talked about, pictorial or graphic works of art. Modern quilting, it says simple and clean with solid colors.
Very clean lines, quite often bold colors.
Now, piecing a fabric, what's that?
That's when you take the two shapes and you marry them with your sewing. And you put the pieces together. Some of the blocks can have 15, 16, 20 pieces in them. And then you'll have like 24 or 36 blocks in a quilt pretty easily, if not more. Sometimes it's up to 100 because you have 8 across and 10 down. So, and then you add your borders. So you do get quite a bit of fabric in a quilt.
But there are all kinds of ways to piece a quilt. Most people use, a sewing machine. Put two fabrics together and sew a 1/4 of an inch seam. There's also applique, where it's you cut out your shapes and sew them on top of your quilt by turning the edges under and hand sewing them with needle and thread, or machine sewing them with a raw edge.
Now, what's English paper?
English paper piecing, you take a little cardboard shape and you kind of gather your fabric around it, and then you whip stitch the pieces together to make your block. So it's a lot of handwork. I find the handwork as being very meditative. It's just kind of a nice way to slip away and kind of enjoy the handwork.
Of course, we're talking about hand quilting. What's free motion quilting?
Free motion quilting is done on your sewing machine, and it's the way of just not sewing in any certain pattern. It's just a random scrolling through your fabric.
You put your feed dogs down
on your machine.
Your what?
So the feed dogs, the feed dogs collect the fabric and pull it back as you sew one stitch at a time.
Feed dogs. Okay, I'm learning terms here.
So when you do free motion, you put the feed dogs down, so your whole piece of quilt is loose, and your hands actually move the quilt around, making the patterns.
That's the free motion. Okay.
Yes.
Here's another good term: walking foot quilting.
The walking foot is an attachment that goes onto your sewing machine, and it helps to pull the fabric through smoothly as you do your machine quilting.
Long arm quilting?
The long arm is a very popular way, and David, it's probably almost as wide as your studio here and can cost up to a price of a small car. It can come with a computer on it, and it's a way of quilting a quilt. You lay it out flat and roll it so that as you unroll it, you can do the design. And the beauty of that computer on that machine is that you can take a block and you show it the size, and then you press a button on the computer of what pattern you want, and it sews that pattern onto the top as part of your quilting.
They call it a long arm because the machine actually has a long space underneath for you to put your quilt underneath, and it actually comes towards you.
Okay.
And you can quilt a quilt in just a matter of a day or 2 or 3, opposed to the hand quilting that may take weeks.
We're getting a lesson from the Raintree Quilters Guild here. More interesting terms, and I had no idea what we're talking about here, but you'll explain to me. Fat quarters.
Oh, I was hoping you would ask.
Okay. Fat quarters.
Okay. If you went to buy a yard of a fourth of a yard of fabric, which would be 9 inches. The width of a fabric is usually about 42 inches, so you would get 9 inches by 42. Well, the fat quarter got invented because you take a yard of fabric and you cut it in fourths, and then your piece is 18 by 22, which is a much more usable piece of fabric. So that's a fat quarter.
And so you go to the fabric store and I want a fat quarter, and they know what you're talking about.
That's right.
They go right to it. Okay. And we have other fat items, a fat eighths.
The same as the quarter, only
Okay.
it's a larger piece of fabric.
Okay. Here we go.
But-
Charm pack.
Charm packs are a whole collection of fabric, usually in a square. So you can get 15 different fabrics in 10-inch squares and have enough to make an entire quilt.
A designer comes out with a line of fabric, and it will have maybe 15 different fabrics. So the manufacturer cuts like a 10-inch square of each of those fabrics and puts them into a charm pack. So you have a real variety of fabric to choose from.
Jelly rolls.
Jelly rolls are like 2.5-inch strips, cutting long strips and then rolled up like a jelly roll. So you can just see all the swirling colors on top that you're getting in that whole jelly roll.
Okay. All right. And we have more of a food theme here. Layer cakes. I'm getting hungry. Okay.
Well, layer cakes are kind of like a larger charm pack, really. They're just a selection from a fabric line cut into larger pieces.
And then finally we have turnovers.
And those are, of course, triangular shaped fabrics already cut and stacked up to look like a turnover. But
So when you guys go into a fabric store, is it wild? Do you just go crazy in there? What's that like? Do you want to touch everything?
Yes, you do.
Oh, yeah.
You do, but you usually have something in mind that you're working on that you need something. And if you, the shop owners quite often have samples of a fabric line put together into a quilt, and that's real inspiration. So then they have the requirements for that quilt project. But a lot of times I want a variety of like blues to put into a quilt. So I'll shop their fat quarter section and I can find all kinds of blues for my project.
or you can get inspiration, for another piece, starting another piece. If you just find a piece of fabric you fell in love with, you start using that as your focus fabric and start collecting fabrics to match.
Now, are there quilting lessons available?
There are. A lot of the local quilt stores do give lessons, but even our guild, we have lots of teachers that come in that are national traveling teachers, we call them. We hire them to come in and teach classes. And also our guild members will teach workshops. And you can come in, if you're a guild member, you can take one of their classes for $5. Now, I don't know where else you could learn for $5.
And we have a quilt university. Like if I wanted to learn how to put the binding on that quilt, Karen might be teaching it, but she shows her method of how she does that, because there's all kinds of ways to do it. And I admire Karen's work, and I know she would do a binding really nicely. So Quilt University at our guild.
Okay. So what's new in quilting?
What's new?
What's old? Is that new again?
Really, it goes through phases, and right now the art quilt is very prevalent in our industry.
And the modern quilts. That's probably the newest. There are modern quilt guilds out there, and they have one show a year called QuiltCon.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of young members. Some of the newer, new starting quilters are going to the modern quilt guilds. And the QuiltCon show travels around to different places every year. So it's a great show to attend.
Now, there are certain quilting events that you guys host every year. You have the big quilting show, and
We
that's
do.
a yearly event. Tell me about that.
Well, Karen is our publicity chair this year, so she would know best.
Well, our show happens every 2 years. And we're having it in 2023, so we'll have it again in 2025. It's at the Old National Events Plaza. We have over 200 quilts to see, and it is a judged show, so we hire a judge to come in and judge it. And this year, in 2023, we have monetary awards for the first time. So we have about $6,000 in awards that will go to the best of show, the best use of color, and all of the different categories, first, second, and third place.
What's the barn quilt trail?
You make usually a wooden piece, sometimes as large as 36 by 36, and they're hanging them on the barns on farms. And you'll see them in town, too, on a garage or a fence in a little bit smaller size. But it is a quilt block pattern that's painted on a piece of wood. And I know Gibson County has a quilt barn trail where they've got them mapped out. And I believe if you just go to their tourist center, they have pamphlets that tell you where that is.
So what's your message out there to someone who wants to get involved in quilting?
I have loved the experience, David. It's kept me enthused by belonging to the Guild. I've made lots of friends. I think that's the highlight. And it's really fun to hang out with people of like interest. And I've learned so much. We do a lot of education. We do a lot of philanthropy to the community. And it's just a great group of women. There's always learning and fun.
Do you feel like it's a legacy that's passed on by 2 generations?
Yes, it is. It is. Actually, I'm teaching my granddaughter to sew now. So she had her first project in 4-H.
Oh, well, what was that project like?
It was fun. She started when she was 11 sewing. So she did a great job.
So 4-H is involved, too.
Yes.
Good,
Yes.
good. So now, how does somebody get involved with the Raintree Quilters Guild? How do you start?
Our meetings are the first Wednesday of each month at SWERCA, which is on Virginia Street. Just come to one of the meetings at 6:30. You're welcome to come as many times as you like before you join. But you'll see as soon as you come in how welcoming everyone is. If you want to learn how much advice everyone will give you. And there's also gatherings outside of the quilt meetings. We have our own little bees that meet once a month as well. So you really do get some close friendships with like-minded people.
And you have different skill levels, I imagine.
Oh, yes.
Because, I mean, this is kind of intimidating to see some of these works of art, like, I could never do that, or you might feel like that's beyond my capabilities.
It starts out with just a simple block, learning how to pick your colors in your fabric, because you always want light, medium, and dark values in your colors. You want a pattern, and the shapes of all the things are sometimes a little easier for the beginners than some of the more intricate ones. But there's always ways to learn. There's always somebody to ask. And I encourage them to come about 6 o'clock when the doors open, because there's just a lot going on. And it gives us a little time to explain things to a new member and kind of help them orient to what the Guild is. But find a few friends and find a small group to get involved with, and you'll make good friends and learn a lot.
Well, I think socializing is probably a big part of it, too, isn't it?
It is. And they shouldn't be intimidated, you know. If that's something that they want to do, if they remember their grandmother doing it and say, I think I can do that, they can.
Well, my guests have been Karen Hampton and Darlene Robinette with the Raintree Quilters Guild of Evansville. As we've heard, a rewarding hobby for many, even a business for others. And remember, when life gives you scraps, you can always make a quilt, right?
Amen.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks, ladies. I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street.